Welcome to Jeff Kinney Virtually Live, brought to you by Puffin Books. My name's Adele Minchin and I'm your Wimpy host for today's very special event. We're here at Forest Hill School in South London and we've got our wonderful live theatre audience here. Please give a big warm welcome to this camera over here. Thank you, thank you. But we are, of course, also joined by our online audience, our virtual audience who are watching from schools and libraries and bedrooms across the globe. So a very big warm welcome to all of you watching out there. Jeff Kinney is the mastermind genius behind the phenomenally successful Diary of a Wimpy Kid series, which have sold over 58 million books worldwide. And today, Jeff is going to take us on a wonderful, magical tour of the Wimpy Kid books, and you're going to learn everything you need to know about the Wimpy Kid series. You will, of course, have the opportunity to put all of your burning questions to Jeff. So for those of you watching online, if you could submit your questions during the course of the event, that would be brilliant, and we'll aim to get to as many of them as possible during the course of the event. So, without further ado, let's have a very, very big welcome for Mr. Jeff Kinney.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully this microphone is on. Do we hear the mic? Do you hear the mic? Okay, great. There we go. There it is. First of all, I'm very, very excited to be here. Thank you so much for coming out to hear me talk. I don't take any audience for granted. Back in the United States, when I started off in the first 2 years, I really didn't have anybody show up for my book signing events. It was like 0 or 1 people showed up for each one of my events. So it's exciting to see an audience here. And hello to everybody watching on the web. Thank you so much for showing up for me. I wanted to start off with a story. I'm in a school here, so I'm going to start with a story from my school days. A little bit of beeping, so oh well, we'll just ride through it. I wanted to start with a story from my school days. When I was in secondary school, which we call high school in the States, we had this teacher named Mrs. Humphreys. And she was this kind of grumpy, frumpy woman, and none of the kids really respected her, and she didn't really like us either. But when it came time to give out grades, she didn't write them down, or marks, I guess you would call them here, at the end of the term. She didn't write them down. She actually whispered them to each one of us in turn, right? And so the first kid she walks up to, and she whispers the grade in this kid's ear. She goes, C. And then the next kid, she gave him his mark, C. And we realized we could all hear, you know, she was one of these teachers that didn't have a whispering voice. So we could all hear that we were all going to get C's. And we were sort of relieved at that because we kind of all deserved to get F's or, you know, fail. But she gave us each a C. And then finally, she got to a kid named Massimo Tenaglia, who was this nice kid, really well behaved. And she whispers into his ear, and she goes, C. And Massimo, totally out of character, just stands up, starts flapping his arms. He's like, what? I'm the only kid in this class who did his work. I studied for every test. I turned in my homework on time, and you're going to give me a C? And in our school, you really didn't talk to teachers like that, so everybody sort of held their breath. We didn't know what Mrs. Humphreys was going to do. Was she going to send him to detention or what? And so we waited, and she looked at him for a little while, and then she leans into him and goes, B. So I love stories. I love to collect stories, funny things that happened to me as a kid. I like to put into my books. But I wanted to tell you the story of how Diary of a Wimpy Kid came to be. I actually never meant to be a children's author or an author at all, really. I wanted to be a cartoonist. I wanted to create cartoons for newspapers. And in college, I had a comic strip called Igdoof, and I worked on it for a few years, and I thought, you know, maybe I could have some success with this. But what happened instead was that I just had years of rejection letters. And if there are any artists or writers or musicians in this group who want to do something creative later on, you can expect to have a lot of rejection before you actually break through. So I went through about 3 years of rejections, and the problem wasn't that I was just this great cartoonist and nobody could recognize it. The problem was that I just couldn't draw very well. In fact, I thought that maybe my drawings were about at an 11-year-old level. And so I said, what can I do? I want to be a cartoonist, but I just can't kind of break through. I can write pretty well, but I just can't draw that well. And finally I said, you know what, if I draw like a kid, why don't I just embrace that, and why don't I draw like a kid on purpose? And so that's where the idea for Diary of a Wimpy Kid came from, is that I finally embraced the fact that I couldn't draw very well, and I said, I'm going to create this character named Greg Heffley, and I'm going to write as him. So that's where the idea came from. And what happened was, I filled up this journal. I said, you know what I'm going to do? Instead of just diving right in and writing my book, I'm actually going to get a blank journal, and I'm going to start writing ideas down in my blank journal. And then I'm going to get enough ideas, hopefully that I can write a good book. Because if I just started writing right away, my book wouldn't be very good. And so at first, I was really kind of cruising. I could do about 4 empty pages. I could fill them up a day. And by the end, I started to really slow down. I started to write smaller and smaller. I think I was afraid that I wasn't going to have a very good book, and I didn't want to race to the end of my idea book. And by the end, it took me about 4 months to fill up just 1 page. And it took me 4 years total to fill up just my idea book. And by the end, I counted up all the ideas, and I said, how many pages would my book be if I wrote a book based on all the ideas that I've created? And it was 13,000 pages of material that I had created. So that's been great. I'm still drawing off of those pages to this very day. And what I did was, instead of trying to get my work published right away, I started publishing online. There's a website I work for called FunBrain, and I started actually releasing entries in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book each day. And what was happening was, I was writing an entry and releasing it at about 3 in the morning, and I'd instantly get feedback from people in Europe, actually, and people from all over the world who would write back and say, I love what you're writing. And I just thought, wow, the world has really changed. I live in this really old house in Plainville, Massachusetts, in this crummy basement that used to be a stable, actually, and I was broadcasting to the world. So that was a really big change for me, and I think it's sort of a time in history when things were really changing. And that's something I'd say to you guys, if you ever want to be creators, you're in a great position now in these days because you can actually create something and find an audience online, which is something I was able to do with Wimpy Kid before I actually got it printed. But I brought my sample packet. Once I was done publishing online for a few years, I brought a sample packet to a New York Comics convention. And I just had this little sample, and I walked around, and nobody seemed really interested. And then finally, I found this guy who took a look at what I had written, and he said, this is exactly what we're looking for. And so after all those years of suffering through a lot of tough rejections, I had a breakthrough moment, which was just great. A twist in the story is that all that while, in the 8 years from the time I thought of Diary of a Wimpy Kid until the time it got published, I never once thought I was writing for children. I thought that I had written in a book for adults where I was sort of looking back on childhood. And so my publisher said, you know what, this would be much better as a children's series. So that's how I sort of became a children's author on accident. The first time I ever saw my book in a bookstore was very exciting, but it was also very demoralizing. I saw it under a giant banner that said, Books for Girls, right? And I started touring. I started going out there and trying to meet my fans. And in fact, one time I went from Boston to the West Coast in California. I went all the way to a bookstore in California, and there was just one person waiting for me there, an 8-year-old girl. And I didn't know what to do. I had put together this whole presentation. So I sat next to this girl on a bench, and I gave her my whole speech. And she kept looking at her mom like, get me out of here. But I plowed through, and then I was just trying to find out like what we might have in common, and she was like, well, I just had a birthday, and I had a sleepover, I had a slumber party. I was like, I like sleepovers, and in any other situation, I think I would have been arrested for having this conversation. But what happened was, it started off slow, then about a year and a half in, I showed up at an event, and there was about 600 people there in a very small room. and it was really hot and stuffy, and I was just shocked that that many people had come out to see me, because up to that point I hadn't had any success. And in fact, it was so hot that the first person in line threw up on the floor next to me while I was doing my big book signing, and so that was very unsettling. But it's been a crazy ride since then. The book is published in 30 different languages at least, and some of the titles are pretty funny. The German version, I was told, you know, we actually can't call it Diary of a Wimpy Kid in Germany. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, there is actually no word for wimp in our country. So I thought that that was pretty funny. And I said, well, what do you want to call it? And they said, we want to call it Greg's Tagebuch von Idioten am Singeld. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, it's Greg's journal, I'm surrounded by idiots. So I thought that that was a better title than my own title, actually. But people ask me all the time, they say, now that you've got all these books out there and you're a successful author, has your life changed? And people ask me if I'm posh, right? I don't really know what that means here, but they say, you know, they think that I have this really crazy lifestyle. But even though a lot of strange things have happened, I actually have a really normal life. I live in a town called Plainville in Massachusetts, and it's a small town with, I think, 2 stoplights. And I still have my day job. I actually work for the same company I worked for before, which is Pearson, which is located here in London. And I created a website called Poptropica, which is a big virtual world for kids. And that's something that I really enjoy doing, so that's why I still work there. But sometimes when I get a little bit full of myself, I think, you know, I'm really famous. I always get shot down. I'm involved in the Cub Scouts. My sons are both in it, and so I'm one of the leaders. And a few months ago, none of the scouts were asking me about my books. And I was like, well, why aren't they asking me about my books? And finally, this kid comes up to me, he goes, what's your name? And I said, my name's Mr. Kinney. And he sat and looked at me, and he said, well, what's your first name? And I said, it's Jeff. And I was like, fingers crossed. And then he looked at me for a while more, and he goes, you've got the same name as the guy who wrote those books. So another time, actually, same kind of story. We were doing a canned food drive in Plainville. And we were collecting canned food for the needy, and the deal was that everybody in Plainville had to leave a bag of canned food out on their front porch. And then the scouts came around, collected everything, and brought it back to the food pantry. And then we got together and kind of sorted it out. And this one kid, he walks up to me, and he recognized me for sure. He just stopped in his tracks, right? And he goes, you're Jeff Kinney. And I was like, oh, yes, I am. And I'm like patting myself down for a pen, because I figure he's going to want me to sign something for him. And then he looks at me and he goes, you didn't leave your canned food out on your front porch. So, like I said, I never take a crowd for granted, because in my own hometown, they don't really care about what I do for a living. But part of why I'm here today is to talk to you about Cabin Fever. How many of you guys have that book? Good number, very cool. Cabin Fever is about Greg being trapped inside with his family during the holidays. And actually, the creation of the book is the story of 3 storms, right? We had a really bad winter in New England this past year. And in January, actually, it snowed and snowed and snowed again. And one time we lost power for about an hour and a half, which isn't a terribly long amount of time. But where I live, if there's no electricity, there's no heat, and there's no water, so you can't flush your toilets or anything like that. So I panicked a little bit. I said, wow, what would it be like to be stuck inside with your family during the holidays? So that's where I got the idea for Cabin Fever. And then ironically, we were making the 3rd Wimpy Kid movie in Vancouver over the summer when I was wrapping up my book, when I was doing all of the illustrations for my book. And what happened was that back home on the east coast of the United States, Hurricane Irene hit. It hit the whole East Coast, and it knocked out power to where we were living. So it knocked out power for about 5 days. And so my family was in Vancouver, and we got to totally skate on that storm. We got to ride it out in sunny Vancouver. In fact, my kids got to be extras in the new movie because of that storm. Then what happened was, just a few weeks ago, as my book was getting ready to come out, a third storm hit, a third kind of freak storm hit, and we lost power again right before Halloween. All the power was down, and for 5 more days, we lost power. So I've had my fill of storms, and I really know what I'm writing about in Cabin Fever. So I hope you like that book. And I think this is a time in the presentation when we can start finding out if you guys have any questions for me about cartooning or about my book. So here's Adele, and you're going to lead this portion of the presentation.
Thank you. Let's take some questions from our online audience first of all. We've got a question from Mr. C. Tatton in Lancashire, and he asks, is Greg based on a real person?
I would say that Greg Heffley is not, you might have noticed, he's not the perfect kid, right? And he's sort of a magnification of my own flaws as a kid. And I heard a kid up there earlier asking out loud, why is he called the Wimpy Kid? I'm afraid I was a bit of a wimp when I was a kid. And one of the things that Greg does in the second book is he hides out from his swim team coach in the locker room, right? He'd rather be in the locker room freezing his tail off than swimming in the pool. And I'm afraid that was me as a kid in a Speedo. Like for the whole hour of swim team, I'd be hiding out there shivering. And yes, just like Greg, I wrapped myself in toilet paper to keep warm. So that's where Greg Heffley was really born.
Great answer. We've got a question from Mrs. Ash of Bishop Loveday School, and her class ask, did you enjoy school when you were a kid, and what was your best or worst lesson?
That's a good question. I did enjoy school as a kid when I did well. Math proved to be pretty difficult later on, but I really liked English and writing and creating. And I think the best lesson that I had wasn't a lesson in the proper sense, but it was a personal lesson. I had a teacher named Mrs. Norton, and she was this matronly kind of woman, about in her mid-60s, not the type of person you expect like a 9 or 10-year-old boy to connect with, but we had a really special connection. And I used to draw a lot back then. In fact, I drew better then than I do now. And the adults around me would always praise me. They'd say, you're a great artist, you're a great illustrator. And then Mrs. Norton took a look at my work, and she would criticize it. And it was actually kind of shocking to me and sort of hurtful at the time. She would say, well, you didn't plan that picture very well. Look, you chopped off the feet of that character because you weren't thinking that the end of the page was coming. And for me, that was actually a great lesson because she inspired me to try to be excellent. And I think that that's a good lesson for kids, is that you have the opportunity to be excellent and to push yourself harder. So that was my best lesson.
Great tip from Mr. Kinney there. Have we got a question from the audience?
Are you going to make Diary of a Wimpy Kid cartoons?
That's an interesting question. I wanted to be a cartoonist, and now I think I have the opportunity to be a cartoonist in the proper sense, right, in newspaper comics. But the truth is, I think that that medium, that space is too confining. What I really like about the books is that I can tell my cartoon jokes, but if I want, I can just make a single line or a single drawing, or I can spread out a joke over several pages. So I like being unbound, and I like not being restricted to 3 little boxes.
And another question from the audience.
Why does Greg have so much bad luck?
Why does Greg have so much bad luck? I don't actually think that Greg does have bad luck. I think that Greg makes his own bad luck. Greg, you'll notice in the books, you shouldn't feel sorry for Greg because most of the things that happen to him are as the result of poor choices. And here's something that happens in Cabin Fever that actually happened to me in real life, is that Greg hangs up these flyers, these posters that are printed on neon green poster board on the school, and he's not supposed to post things on the school. It rains, the dye bleeds onto the school, and now Greg has become a sort of vandal. And that happened to me in college. I advertised for my own book, Igdoof, and I put up a flyer on every single white pillar of my college, and the ink bled, and then I became a vandal in my parting days at college. So that wasn't bad luck, it was a choice I made.
A couple more questions from our online audience. A question from Claire Burkett. We have just had our school reports, and we all have advice in them on how we can improve our work. What did your school reports say, and And did they say you could do better?
I was a pretty good student in my elementary school days. And then actually, the only thing that I really needed to work on was my handwriting. So one time I got straight A's because my teacher decided to be very forgiving. But in college, actually what happened was I was a computer science major. And I was a miserable computer science major because I had a comic in my paper. And so I prioritized my comic over my work, and I ended up having to switch my major at the last minute to criminal justice. So that's why I'm a children's author with a criminal justice degree.
We've got a question from Annie in Milton Keynes. My pupils are in year 3 and year 4, that's age 7 to 8. What advice would you give them to write simple narratives?
To write simple narratives, that's a good question. I think there was a brilliant writer named O. Henry, right, who wrote these really short stories that have been really potent. Gift of the Magi was one of the most famous, which is really worth reading. But I think that you can really boil a story down to its essence. You can write a story in just a few sentences. And what I really like about cartooning, actually, is that that's what cartooning is boiling something down to its essence. And in cartoons, you can actually tell a story very quickly with a few lines. There was a cartoonist about 100 years ago who was challenged by his editor to try to use half as many lines. And he said, if I use half as many lines, I'd have to charge you twice as much. And I think that there's a lesson there, which is that you should use as little information as possible to tell the biggest story.
A couple more questions from our live audience. One here.
Are you planning to make any more Diary of a Wimpy Kid books in the future?
I am. I'm planning on making at least one more, and hopefully 3 more after that. Something that's really hard to tell is that I think every creative endeavor, whether it be a comic strip or a television show or a book series, I think has a lifespan. There's a point in time at which the thing should just end. And it's really hard for me to tell when Diary of a Wimpy Kid can end. Like, I don't want to overstay my welcome, right? I don't want to stay too long. So I think that lifespan for Diary of a Wimpy Kid is somewhere between 7 and 10 books.
Got another one over here.
Hello, my name is Dylan. What was your favorite Diary of a Wimpy Kid book that you wrote?
I think my favorite Diary of a Wimpy Kid book will always be the Red Book, because it is always going to represent to me the time that I didn't have any success in getting published, and then one day I did. And I remember the day I got that book in the mail, and I just couldn't stop holding it. And I just felt like, you know, it was proof that I had finally done something worthwhile. And a lot of writers who are much better than me will never get that chance just because of circumstances. But I got that chance. And I just wanted to fill up a swimming pool and just swim around in those books. That's how happy I was. I know that's weird.
We'll take 2 more questions from online, and then we'll carry on with the rest
Yes.
of the presentation. Got a question here from Michelle Waghorn. How did you come up with Greg's family? Is it based on real people?
Is Greg's family based on real people? I think there's a dodgy answer to that, actually. The characters are sort of like my family. What I like to say is that, you know, the stories didn't really happen in real life, but the characters, I wouldn't have been able to write about these characters unless I lived the life that I did. And something I'd really recommend to you guys, it's going to sound sort of preachy, but I'm very serious about this, is that if you can, even if it's for a short time, keep a journal or keep a diary, because you're going to really wish that you had a window back into this time that you were kids. And I didn't do that, actually. I didn't keep a journal until I was in my 20s. And in fact, when I wrote in a journal, I wrote text, and then I wrote little cartoon drawings, and that's what really sparked the idea for Diary of a Wimpy Kid for me.
Our final question is all the way from the Cayman Islands, and their question is, who inspired you to start writing?
Who inspired me to start writing? There was a great cartoonist named Carl Barks who did these Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck cartoons from back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And they were what I thought to be the best storytelling of any kind that I've ever read. So I think that's when I got the bug. Those were passed down to me from my father, who's still alive, so that sounds really like he died, but he didn't. So he introduced me to those comics, and I still love those comics. Great. And so now we're going to get on to the next part of our presentation. How many people here have seen some or all of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies? Wow, good number. That's cool. Well, usually authors don't get to be a part of movie making. They usually kind of hand off their books, cross their fingers, and then show up at the premiere. But I've had a really great experience with the films, and I've actually got to be there for most of the filming of these movies. So that's been really special for me. And as a result, I've gotten to be really good friends with some of the actors, especially Robert Capron, who plays Rowley Jefferson, and also Zach Gordon, who plays Greg Heffley. And in fact, they've agreed to tour with me along with their parents, and we've had a great time. You know, we came from Dublin, then moved on to Scotland and Nottingham, and now here we are in London. So I am very pleased to introduce to you the two actors behind the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies, Zachary Gordon and Robert Capron. So let's hear it. How are you doing? So I have some questions for you. I'm going to put you on the spot before we turn it over to the audience, okay?
Okay.
All right. I'm going to start with you. You're on the poster, right? So we're going to put you in second place right now, right? So now we'll start with Robert here. Robert, you know, we've seen the pictures of Rowley. You look a little bit different from Rowley.
Yes.
And so which is the real Rowley hair? Is it this or the bowl haircut that you have in the movies?
I hate the bowl haircut because, like Jeff said, I think it looks weird that I basically have a bowl on my head. It's that kind of haircut. I don't like it at all. I think this hair is better personally. And in the third Diary of Wimpy Kid movie, I had like a cough there. In the third Diary of Wimpy Kid movie, I actually had to wear a wig because I was in the Three Stooges movie, and I played young Curly. I don't know if anybody here's heard of the Three Stooges. Yeah, basically the Three Stooges hit each other, and it's really funny. But anyway, I played young Curly, which is one of the Three Stooges, and they had to shave the majority of my hair off. So when it was time to film Diary of Wimpy Kid 3, I had basically no hair. So they made me a wig, which was cool. It was really cool.
That's cool. So Zach, what's it like when you're on set? You have to act like Greg Heffley for like 3 months at a time, right? And Greg isn't, you know, you have some things in common, but he's not exactly like you. Is it hard to, like when the cameras stop rolling, is it hard to stop thinking like Greg?
You know, the deal with that is like when you act like a character, you have to put yourself in his situations and deal with them the way he would. And, you know, it's crazy because Greg is just this totally different character than I am in real life. And so in between takes, I would still act like my character just to stay in that, you know, mode. And Robert would be like, Zach, want to play games tonight when we're done filming? And I'd be like, sorry, no, I'm not a baby. Go play with your tricycle. And Robert would be like, what? What are you saying? And I'd be like, no, I'm in character, Robert. Right. And, you know, that's kind of the funny thing is because no one really knows when you're, like, in a method state, like when you're acting like your character, so it's kind of hard to keep that going, too, as well.
So, Robert, what you've been on in stage productions. In fact, you had a role in a Christmas...
yes.
What is it?
I had a role in the play A Christmas Carol. I played Turkey Boy. Right. So there.
And you actually had to speak in a Cockney accent, right?
Yes.
You know where this is heading, right?
Yes.
And this is your first time in the UK, right?
Yes.
Yes. In fact, today's your first full day in London. Is that true?
Yes.
Right. So are you going to give us a line?
Oh, man. I did that when I was 9. So if I don't sound good, please, like, don't get angry.
All right. So the question for the audience before he gives it is, would you believe that this was a guy with a real legitimate Cockney accent?
Okay. All right. The one as big as my? There. I get so embarrassed. I get so embarrassed.
That was good. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel beautiful.
Right. So Zach, you've, in addition to doing the Wimpy Kid movies, you've also done some television acting. So can you tell me what's the difference between acting in front for TV cameras and acting for film?
It's kind of a pretty big difference because when you're filming a TV episode or a TV show, there's 3 cameras, so they film 3 different shots that you have to get in movie making all at once. So basically when you're filming a movie, it's 3 times as long as it would be in television. So when you get the different angles, like when it's a close-up or a wide shot where you have 2 people in the shot, it takes a little bit longer. Except in TV as well, you do a read-through before every episode every week, so that's kind of different too, because in the movie, you just do one huge read-through of the whole script before you start filming.
So I think what we'll do now is we're going to ask, I'm sure you guys have questions for these actors, so let's move into that portion, and kids from the online audience might also have questions for you guys.
Okay, we've got a question from the audience.
How did you become interested in acting?
For me, it just sort of happened. The first play I ever did, and Jeff has been desperately waiting to say this, is
would that be Spider Baby Save Christmas?
Okay, the first play I was in was an after-school play at my school. I was in 3rd grade, for the record, and it was called Super Babies Save Halloween, not Spider Baby Save Christmas.
I see. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
And I played Spider Baby, and I had to wear a diaper. That was the first play I ever did. But back to the actual question, Jeff. What happened was I just wanted to take after-school classes at something, so I decided to take those classes, and everybody thought I was really good. So I ended up taking classes at an actual theater. Then I got Agent, which gets you auditions and stuff like that. I auditioned a lot, and I got this.
For me, the thing is when I was 4, I told my mom that I wanted to be an actor or be on TV. And everyone used to walk up and say that I should be in commercials or something, so it kind of stuck with me. And my mom thought the whole thing would blow over because she said I should do it when I learned how to read. And eventually I forgot about it for a couple of years, but then when I was 8, it came back to me, and I said, Mom, let's go to another acting class or something. And she said, okay, fine, I'll take you to this audition, and let's see if you get it or not. And the funny thing was I didn't get the role, but they wrote a part in the movie for me, and that's how I kind of started acting.
There's a comment here directed at Jeff from somebody in our online audience. It's from Stuart Clark in Hull, and he says, "Hi Jeff, can you tell my class to be quiet, please? They're excited to hear you speak. Thank you."
Which camera do I look into?
Central.
Students, behave. Okay, was that good? Is that how you would do it here?
Absolutely.
Actually, I have a question.
Strict.
I say a bit more strict. I have a question for these guys. Now, you mentioned that you were in a diaper on stage, and
Yes.
you've been in your underwear in the movies, right? And worse,
This
right?
is all he thinks about.
But it's very curious to me is that as an actor, when you see that the role calls for you to be in an embarrassing situation, do you say I'm not doing that, or do you say okay, no problem?
I had to be in a lot of embarrassing situations for the Wimpy Kid films, and I just kind of sucked it up because I knew it would make people laugh. It's worth it. That's the way I look at it.
And for me, like I said, when you get into character, you feel like it's not a big deal because that would actually happen to your character, even though you'd be embarrassed. But the thing is you still have to do it because not only does it make people laugh, but sometimes it makes you laugh yourself, so you kind of get a kick out of it. And, I mean, it's not the best thing to be just in your underwear, but, I mean, it was kind of fun because I remember in between takes sometimes, there would be people walking on the street, and when we would be filming a scene, taking a break, I'd, just go at them, I'd be waving at them, and they'd be like, and then they'd start running, but it was really funny.
I've got a question from Kelly Cowley in Cheshire for all of you guys. What's the funniest thing that's happened on the movie set?
Well, for me, one of the funniest things is on the second movie, Roderick Rules, Devin Bostic, who plays my older brother, okay, we basically are brothers in real life. We always try to prank each other, even though my pranks always backfire. But the thing is one time Devin said he had a box of Oreos sent to the set. And I said, okay, maybe I can have one. And he said,
Oreo
okay.
cookies? Are they called Hydrox over here, or what? Do you have Oreos?
Yeah.
Oreos?
Yeah,
okay, great.
yeah.
Okay.
Oreo cookies, okay. And so he said, Zach, here's the camera. I want you to dance for this Oreo cookie. And so instead of dancing, I did this little dance or something, and then I grabbed the cookie and ran. So the camera was following me, and Devin was following me. And I really wanted to savor this moment, so I took a slow, big bite. And when I started chewing, it tasted like something minty was in there. And so I looked at the cookie, and it was filled with toothpaste.
So score 1 for Devin. What about you?
I remember something that happened during the third movie. There's one scene where Zach had to be in a kiddie pool, and he was afraid because when you're in like a kiddie pool, there are a lot of babies, and he was worried that maybe one of them went. So he was like flipping out. He's like, this water looks yellow. It does.
There was a huge color difference from this pool and the other pool. Big difference.
So, and the producers and the director knew that Zach was really, really freaked out about it, and they didn't want anything to happen. And so Zach and Peyton, who plays Holly Hills, came up with this idea for a prank. They took a bunch of Tootsie Rolls, put them all together, and put it in the kiddie pool. So it looked like a baby.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Peyton goes up to one of the producers. He's like, I think a baby did something in the pool. And so the producer starts flipping out. He's like, don't tell Zach, don't tell Zach, don't tell Zach. And so what eventually happens is Peyton leads the producer over there, and then when the producer's there, Peyton dives into the pool, grabs it, and picks it up.
And everybody was screaming their heads off.
Everybody was screaming at the top of their lungs. It was so funny.
Well, you stole my funniest moment from the set.
I'm sorry.
So, no, that's okay. So, well, the next question.
I think we've got another question from our live audience here.
Was it your idea to make the movie?
Was it my idea to make the movie? Actually, it was, I was approached by Fox, and they said they wanted to make a movie. And it was really an interesting moment because, like I said before, cartooning is really simplifying things. But a movie is the opposite. It's sort of blowing things out, making things as interesting as possible. So it took me a little while to wrap my head around the fact that, Greg and Rowley, who are basically stick figures in my cartoons, were going to be played by real actors. And in fact, you'll know something about Zach right away is that he does not have 3 little hairs on his head. And so, when we decided to make the movie, when we said go ahead, one of the things they really had to work on was how should he look, because he doesn't look like the cartoon drawing. So they got this hairspray and kind of, they lifted 3 sprigs of hair in the back of his head. So if you look closely in the movies, you'll see that that's how he becomes Greg Heffley.
And they actually did several haircuts for the first movie to get my hair right.
Awkward silence.
Another question just for you, Jeff, from our online audience. This is from C. Scott. What advice would you give to a young person who wants to be an author?
The advice I give to anybody who wants to be any kind of creative person is sort of counterintuitive. It's to actually copy other people who you admire first. Don't try to get it published because that's called plagiarism. But I think that when you take something like a cartoon that you admire, and if you draw it yourself, you can understand how it was created. So I think that you can really deconstruct how something was made, whether it be in music or even acting, and then you can use it in your tool set so that when you want to come up with your own voice, you can sort of draw on that new tool set that you have. So I would copy.
Okay. And from Jane Burton in Somerset, what gave you the idea for the cheese touch?
What gave me the idea for the cheese touch? By the way, you have it now.
Yeah. Saw that coming. Right. Totally saw that coming.
The cheese touch. We actually had a piece of moldy cheese on our church playground. And what happened was this piece of cheese just suddenly arrived one day. And for some reason, nobody just kicked it to the side or swept it up or picked it up and threw it in the trash. It became this legend, right? And nobody would play on that basketball court because there was this one piece of cheese. I think that's something really unique to kids, is that kids like to let their imaginations run wild, and they like to create legends on their own. So we had that, and there are lots of other legends that cropped up in my life.
Can we take another question from the theatre audience?
How do you feel when, you mess something up when you're filming? You're filming and then you mess something up.
When filming, you try not to mess up as much as you can. Sometimes it happens. I mean, it happens to everyone. But the thing is you feel a bit embarrassed, but it kind of makes you work harder and make you feel confident that next time you won't mess it up, because now you feel like, because you've already messed up, you've already used that window up, so you can't do it again. And you just basically get the line right next time. And you have to memorize your lines perfectly before you film the next day as well.
Robert, do you want to answer that one? Have you ever messed up in front of the camera when all the pressure's on you?
Well, the thing is, when you're filming a movie, the good thing is you have multiple chances to get it right. Like, when you're filming, you have something called takes, where basically you do it a certain amount of times, and then when you're all done filming, the director picks the take he likes best. So if you mess up, usually it's not that big of a deal because you can do another take. So it's not that big of a deal when you mess up, but like Zach said, you try not to do it.
And Adele, I know we're close to running out of time, but I wanted to ask this question because I think it's something everybody will be curious about. Like when I saw the Harry Potter movies, I think, well, a lot of people say, well, are Daniel Radcliffe and Rupert Grint, are they good friends off camera as well? And you always kind of hope that the actors are. And I wanted to give you guys a chance to say, are you guys good friends, or once you're done with this, you just part ways?
We really are good friends. I mean, ever since the first movie, we've always had this special bond, I guess you could say. You know, we try to keep in touch as well. I mean, I FaceTime Robert whenever I can sometimes because he lives in Rhode Island and I live in California, and I have a Twitter account that I talk to him and my fans on and stuff. And, you know, it's great because when you see how you really film with someone for 3 months in Vancouver, Canada, if you don't have a special bond with them, it really doesn't work for the friendship in the movie or in real life. So you kind of have to have that connection too as well.
When you're with someone for 3 months at a time filming a movie, you really get to know them. So Zach and I have become really good friends over the course of the 3 movies.
And you've never gotten on each other's nerves, not even once, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but...
We have a disagreement sometimes, but that's what friends do.
We've got time for a couple more questions, one from our theatre audience over there.
What gave you the who was the first person to publish your book?
Who was the first person? It was a group called Amulet, which is part of Abrams, a small publisher in the United States. And then I was thrilled when Puffin published it over here.
A question for Jeff from Samantha Passfield. She asks, when you get stuck, what do you do to help you get some new ideas and know what to write next? How do you get over writer's block?
Yes, I'm always stuck. The ideas are never flowing freely for me. So I try all sorts of different tricks to try to get the ideas to come back, and nothing works. But the thing I try the most is that I actually sit on a couch and I throw a blanket over my head. So I try to block out, sights or anything that will distract me, and sounds. I throw a blanket over my head, and then like every night my wife will find me asleep on the couch with my blanket over my head, and I say, I'm working, when she wakes me up. So it's a strange life being a writer, actually.
And a question for all of you. This is from Simona at Harrow High School. What books do you all like reading in your spare time?
For me, I like reading a variety of books. I like adventure and fantasy books. But one of my favorite books is a book called The Candy Shop Wars. And it's a really good book. And, that's probably one of my favorite books.
In my spare time, I can pretty much read, I like to read a lot of different books. My favorite book series, besides Diary of a Wimpy Kid, is probably Harry Potter, just because it's awesome. And I like Percy Jackson, too. So I read those and reread those a lot.
And the last book that I ever read actually was the Harry Potter series. I don't read at all for 2 reasons. One is because I don't like to be influenced by other writers, but because I like to listen to my books instead. So because I have a full-time job and I work on my own books, I can only listen to books. I listen to the Game of Thrones while I'm writing or while I'm illustrating my own books.
Fantastic. We've come to the end of our event today. As I'm sure you'll all agree, it's been absolutely wonderful to have Jeff here, as well as Zach and Robert. It's been a very, very special event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you to all of you who came here today, and a big thank you to our virtual audience watching online out there. Do join us again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep reading.